Welcome to Chapter 2, where we talk about the cultural development of monsters, demons, and evil. So, in the past, explanations for mass and serial murders and many crimes in general were often derived from demonology. So, this is the belief that life events were controlled by external forces or spirits. So, take for example Berkowitz, the son of Sam. He hunted and killed 13 victims over a period of 13 months in New York City. And at first, he claimed that he did so because his neighbor's demonically possessed dogs commanded him to do so. Spoiler alert, they did not. Some cultures also believe that a person could be invaded by more than one spirit at a time. And multiple personality disorder has been used as a defense by serial killers, although it's incredibly rare for any of them to actually have it. Now, today this is called dissociative identity disorder, and Kenneth Bianchi is one of the Hillside Stranglers. He claimed he was involved in killing 12 women because he was controlled by multiple personalities. Spoiler alert, he was not also. Lycanthropy is the belief of people being able to transform into wolves, and this can be traced back to at least 600 BC when King, oh man, I meant to look this up beforehand. King Nebuchadnezzar believed he suffered from such an affliction. Now, in many legends and folklore, wolves are singled out as being the most likely animal to have dealings with the devil. And so a person being able to command such a metamorphosis became known as a werewolf, were is an Old English term for man, so a man wolf. In the 16th century, Paracelsus wrote that violent, wicked men may return after death as an animal, usually a wolf. Now, the purpose of this human to wolf transformation was the inevitable killing of humans, particularly children, in order to eat their flesh. Now, recurrent throughout werewolf literature is the theme of anthropophagy, the enjoyment of eating human flesh. Jean Grenier, a 17th century freshman, claimed to be a werewolf and confessed that he had devoured the flesh of many young girls. Now, similar to this is the idea of vampires. Bram Stoker's Dracula is modeled on the 15th century nobleman Vlad Tepes, also known as Vlad the Impaler and Dracul, dragon. Now, he was a particularly vicious and depraved sadist who enjoyed torturing and murdering peasants in his jurisdiction. So vampires usually have but one goal, to drink human blood, whereas werewolves mutilated and cannibalized. Vampires were also believed to be sexually involved with their victims. One British vampire, who in 1949 murdered 9 victims, drank blood from each of them. Now, a function of the early church at this time is to find ways to eradicate the problems attributed to witchcraft and sorcery. So, under guidance from Pope Innocent VIII, the first encyclopedia of demonology was produced. And this was used for centuries to identify and destroy witches, wizards, and sorcerers. Thousands of people were identified through torture and then burned at the stake. Now, in Jewish medieval legend, a golem is a robot or an artificial person. Golem means clay figure supernaturally brought to life. A golem can orchestrate the destruction of another human being and have no remorse, no feeling for his or her victim, or external need to defend his or her actions. Now, golems were given life through a way of a charm, and occasionally they ran amok and had to be destroyed. Now, closely tied to demonology and evil are cult-related activities. Now, a cult is a system of religious worship, devotion, or homage to person or thing. Now, one thing that's kind of been argued here is, are serial killers parts of satanic cults? Anton LaVey, author of The Complete Witch, The Satanic Rituals, and The Satanic Bible, founded the Church of Satan on the witches' feast day of Walpurgis Night. Members worship the trinity of the devil, Lucifer, Satan, and the devil. Now, keep in mind, the Church of Satan today is a little bit different, and isn't necessarily geared towards worshiping the devil. Now, within this particular church, there's 9 pronouncements of the devil that Satan represents. indulgence as opposed to abstinence, vital existence as opposed to spiritual pipe dreams, undefiled wisdom instead of hypocritical self-deceit, kindness to those who deserve it instead of love wasted on ingrates, vengeance instead of turning the other cheek, responsibility instead of concern for the psychic vampires, man as just another animal, sometimes better, more often worse, than those who walk on all fours, who because of his divine and intellectual development has become the most vicious of all. All of the so-called sins as they lead to physical, mental, or emotional gratification. The best friend the church has ever had, as he kept it in business all these years, is Satan, according to LaVey. Now, in 2000, in the small Louisiana town of Ponchatoula, a Christian church became divided in leadership. A woman, Lois Mowbray, claimed to be a prophet. Now, some members left the church uncomfortable with the new directions it's going in. And in 2005, Louis David LaMonica, the pastor of the church, confessed to authorities that he was a member of a cult at his own church, that part of the building was dedicated to Christian beliefs and another part to Satan worship. At the core of the satanic worship, he claimed, was the sacrificing of animals and having sex with children. He admitted to having sex with 2 of his sons. I should put in a caveat here. You can't have sex with children. Children are minors, they can't consent. Any sexual activity with a child is abuse, and so we shouldn't call it sex with children. And I should update those slides. Those were from the publisher. 7 other people, including his wife and Mowbray, were eventually indicted, and 2 offenders, including LaMonica, were convicted. Now, you guys might be a little bit familiar with satanic panic. There's a reading about it in the Deviance textbook, if you've taken Deviance and Social Control. And there's been a lot of conspiracies surrounding these ritualistic crimes. One being satanic panic that happened in the 80s, okay? There have been none of the cases that were alleged to have been part of satanic panic, especially the ones involving sacrifice of children, were actually true. During that time period, there was a lot of concern around daycares and that perhaps they were fronts for abusing children. You guys might be more familiar with, in recent times, Pizzagate. And the McMartin preschool is part of that satanic panic daycare. There was a daycare here actually in Malden that also went through this same situation. And in fact, the folks that ran the daycare, was a family, and the folks that were convicted are still actually on the sex offender registry. In fact, right, where is abuse most likely to happen? It's most likely to happen in home by parents and relatives as opposed to children who are placed in daycare. And today, obviously, we have, more rigorous regulations for daycares. But when you make these allegations, right, it generates near hysteria. So in the late 1980s, a voodoo cult in Matamoros, Mexico, was heavily involved in drug smuggling, bringing drugs into the US. And they were believed to have killed 15 to 20 victims, executing them with machetes, guns, and knives. Now, the group had come to believe that through certain forms of witchcraft, the drug smugglers could gain protection. Protection from police, bullets, any threats to their trade. So secret charms and hoaxes of voodoo were practiced to meet the special needs of the smuggler. The group, led by a godfather and a female witch, killed and mutilated their victims. Now, most serial murders who were involved in cult-related homicides do not actually appear to be devoted to the worship of Satan. They tend to be more self-stylized Satanists, maybe adopting or dabbling in the occult. So let's bring this back to this concept of evil, right? What is evil? Evil is a label we reserve for those who are worse than bad, but how do we determine what constitutes good or evil? Now, when we think about homicides, some are easier for us to be like, oh, I understand how that happened. Not to justify it, but to be like, oh, I can see how that happens, right? Crimes of passion, murders that happen out of marital problems, families disputes, folks who have helped somebody end their life as an act of mercy. And most of those offenders will never kill again, right? We know that most people who commit murder, manslaughter, homicide, it's not a recidivist crime. Most folks do not go on to kill again. But multiple homicide offenders are kind of incomprehensible to us. right? When we think about like the mass shootings that we've seen so much in the news recently, or we think about serial killings, it's kind of hard for us to wrap our mind around someone who is killing because they enjoy it. And so does evil become an appropriate label for them? And look at the case study, the little box that talks about Joseph Mengele. Mengele is a doctor during Nazi Germany, and he's a geneticist, and he gets recruited into the Nazi ranks to direct the processing of concentration camp prisoners at Birkenau and Auschwitz during World War II. He engages in a wide variety of very sadistic medical quote unquote experiments. Now, also, we have within the German SS, when the Nazis were in power, they had a mobile killing units that were employed inside occupied Soviet Union, right? So the Soviet Union was the USSR contained Russia and then most of the Eastern Bloc states, who are now their own individual countries. But the goal was to hunt down and exterminate those racially or politically opposed to the mission of the Third Reich. This is considered to be the first step in Hitler's final solution. And they murdered victims, including Jews, communists, the Roma, who were gypsies, which, by the way, to say that somebody gypped you is a racial slur or an ethnic slur. It refers back to this group of people, the gypsies from Roma, and people who were mentally or physically disabled. Now, we know that the Holocaust ran death camps, right? And so Viktor Frankl wrote a book about his 3 years as a prisoner in the Holocaust death camps. Now, he was a psychiatrist, and he noted that people had very different responses to extreme human indignity, suffering, and death. Suffering, he noted, brought out the very best in people and the very worst in people. Some were willingly laying down their lives to protect fellow inmates, while others collaborated with their guards, selling out their own people in order to survive. So as we finish up this chapter, men and women who commit these kind of atrocities, are they possessed by evil? Is that what we mean by evil? Is evil a word to describe like the worst of the worst crimes that we see humanity commit? Or do they make conscious evil choices just as others choose good?